So James, you recently wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, which really caught my attention. The president needs the power to fire bureaucrats. Now it's kind of an interesting moment to be publishing such an op-ed. So tell me about this.
Well, in theory, the president runs the executive branch. We have an election, people pick who they want to be the president, and all executive power, per the Constitution, is put in the president, and the federal bureaucracy is supposed to do what the president says. That's not how it works in practice. The way it works in practice is that these federal employees have very extensive removal protections. It's not impossible to fire a federal employee, it's just almost impossible. And a ton of work and a very high likelihood that it's going to get overturned. And so in practice, these career federal bureaucrats think they're invulnerable because they've got these extensive protections. They have a lot of ways to try and stymie the president's agenda, and in many cases successfully block him from taking policies, even if he campaigned on them, even if it was a presidential priority. The bureaucracy, because of these civil service protections, is empowered to basically say, yeah, but we know better and we're not going to do this. No one votes for these bureaucrats. They have no accountability to the American people. And if the government is wielding its vast power in a manner divorced from what the elected representatives in Congress and the president in the White House is saying, then you have an unaccountable government. And it's a huge problem in a country founded on the principle of government by the consent of the governed.
You know, so why now? Why at this moment are you publishing this?
Well, it's gotten a lot of attention recently. I served in the White House under President Trump for all 4 years. Part of my responsibilities there was working on civil service issues as well as some regulatory issues. And in the White House, I would just get constant reports from my counterparts in the different federal agencies about all the things that federal employees were doing to make it harder for them to implement the president's agenda. We put out a report in February of this year documenting this. But I think, honestly, what's happened is there's been more attention to an executive order that I work pretty heavily on called creating Schedule F in the accepted service, which sounds about as exciting and energizing as watching paint dry, but it would have been very profoundly impactful in terms of holding the federal bureaucracy to account. And that executive order was in the news recently. There was some Axios reporting that prompted some members of Congress to basically introduce legislation to say that no future president could ever bring back this executive order. Biden rescinded it. And then I published this op-ed in response to say, no, actually we need this. If we want to protect our democracy, if you in Congress want the executive branch to implement the laws you passed, the bureaucracy has to be accountable to the people's elected representatives, and it's not right now.
Before we continue, I just have a message from one of our sponsors. For all of you with retirement savings accounts, America's federal debt is now at $30 trillion, and our policies during this pandemic are causing inflation to soar to multi-decade highs. A lot of folks are rightly worried about what this will mean for their retirement savings. You can protect your life savings with the only thing that has always held value, physical gold and silver. To get started, you can call Goldco at 855-973-0470 for a free wealth protection kit. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They guarantee highest price buybacks, and they always offer free shipping. Ask how you can even get $10,000 or more in free silver. Don't wait. Call 855-973-0470. Now that's 855-973-0470. You know, you did put out this report in February, and so maybe give us some examples of the sort of problems that you encountered.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of problems with the federal workforce. A lot of people are familiar with the stereotype of the incompetent, lazy, poor-performing government employee. There's a good number of those folks. Surveys of federal employees themselves show that there's a lot of those folks, and it frustrates the federal workforce. But they're not actually the biggest problem. The biggest problem are the very smart and capable and highly motivated people who don't like the president's policies and are very capable of using their positions to block it. So the way the government is staffed is it's about 2.2 million people in the executive branch. It's a huge bureaucracy. And there's 4,000 political appointees. So the political appointees are there to provide high-level direction and supervision and sort of policy directions with the expectation that the career staff are going to faithfully implement those orders. If they decide they don't want to carry out those orders and they're protected with these removal protections, they're simply not orders of magnitudes near enough political appointees to do that work instead. So one example, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is notorious for having very ideologically motivated career staff. And many, many, many times during the Trump administration, these career staff were told, well, there's projects we want you to work on. And the answer that came back was, no, go pound sand. So for example, Yale University, there's an investigation into Yale University and massive, massive racial discrimination in admissions at Yale University. If you're a Caucasian, and especially if you're an Asian American. And so the leadership in the Civil Rights Division said, look, the law says there's no racial discrimination allowed. This is unjust. We want to file a suit. And the career staff would not draft the complaint. So it had to be drafted by political appointees. Then after the political appointees drafted it, they turned around to the career staff, the division responsible for policing racial discrimination in educational institutions, said, all right, now we need a team of lawyers to pursue this case. And the answer that came back was no. None of us are willing to work on this. Now, they were able to bring the case at the end of the day because they were able to poach staff from other components of the Department of Justice that were less political. So they took some employees from the Civil Division, from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Connecticut, where Yale is located, a political appointee, and they're able to bring the case. But you can do that with one case. You can't do that with 50.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're telling me that they just simply flat out refused the order?
They were asked to assemble a team. And the answer that came back was, no, we're not going to do that. Now, my understanding is they were not ordered to work on it. But look, if you order them to work on the case, then you've got attorneys working on a case who deliberately want to tank the case. And so it's, it doesn't get you what you need. And in fact, what the political appointees learned subsequently is that the more senior career staff were, in so many words, threatening the junior career staff and saying, hey, anyone who helps the Trump politicals with this case, there will be career repercussions against them when Trump leaves office. Another example, obviously the abortion debates been in the news a lot recently. There's a lot of mixed opinion, split public opinion on abortion. But one area where there's overwhelming consensus is that doctors and nurses should not be forced to participate in abortions. This is something, if you take a look at polling for decades now, 80–90% of Americans believe that you should have these conscience protections. And Congress also agrees and passed something in the 1970s called the Church Amendments, named after the Democrat senator from Idaho who introduced them, that says, look, if you're a hospital that takes federal funding, you cannot force your staff to participate in an abortion. But there's no private right to sue. It has to be up to the Department of Justice to sue to enforce these things. Well, the career staff in the Civil Rights Division, they were not willing to work on cases that enforced them. And so again, during the Trump administration, political appointees were able to bring one case that they had to handle themselves against a hospital in Vermont that did that. And you can do that for one or two cases, but you don't have nearly enough political appointees to litigate 15, 20, 30, 50 cases. And again, it's a public record. You can look at the lawsuit that was filed, you can look at the names of the attorneys who are on there, and none of them are career employees in the Department of Justice. They decided for themselves that who cares what Congress thinks? Who cares what the voting public thinks? Who cares what the White House thinks? We don't support these conscience protections, and therefore we will not do anything to enforce them. If you're an attorney, you represent your client. And in the Justice Department, your client is the United States, and you're there to enforce the laws. You don't get to say, you shouldn't get to say, these are the laws I like, these are the laws I don't like, I'm only going to work on these laws.
It's one thing also to kind of slow walk things. You hear about these sorts of situations all the time in the private sector. Or you get something, you're not too keen on it. Well, we'll just take that one quite easy. Maybe it'll take 5 times as long. Who knows? But this is a whole different beast you're describing here.
Yes. Yeah, well, look, and to be clear, the slow walking happens too. This was a chronic problem across agencies, that you'd have rules that would be issued under the Obama administration that would take 12 months to go from start to finish. And the career staff were very motivated, working very hard, all rowing in the same direction to get these rules out. And then when the Trump administration wanted to roll them back, or in many cases just roll back a part of the rule, it would take 2-3 times as long to rescind the rule as it took to issue it in the first place. And they're throwing down delays and obstruction and just constantly, right? I mean, you get these complaints in the press. Why isn't the Trump administration working faster? And the answer was, for a lot of these rules, it had to be political appointees doing most of the work of drafting them. You would assign the rule to be drafted to the career employees, and what they would come back with would be either something that was not the policies they were told to do, or on paper did what they were told, but everyone reading it knew that the courts were going to toss this out on procedural grounds, that it was not going to withstand legal review. So again, it's tough, right? Like, on paper they've complied with their directive, but everyone's in on the joke that this rule is legally insufficient. But yeah, trying to show that in a court of law in the subsequent appeals is very tough. The career staff have a lot of ways to make your life miserable. And look, to be clear, there are many good career staff in the federal government. There were many who work nights, work weekends during the COVID pandemic. I mean, there's a lot of good people out there. This is not every single one. But if you have a body that's 20% healthy normal cells, or sorry, 80% healthy and normal cells and 20% cancer cells, you've got an extremely large problem. And that's what you've got in the bureaucracy. Anywhere between 10 to 99% of the career staff in these agencies are cancerous and simply not concerned with carrying out the people's business, but advancing their own agenda.